Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Big boost for Lewis Hamilton today with reports emerging that his former driver, coach and confidant and longtime friend will be returning to his side for the upcoming season as he pushes to be the best version he can possibly be to take the challenge to Max Verstappen and Red Bull, but also big rumours around the Red Bull camp, with some reports emerging that even Alex Albon could be in the picture again to replace Sergio Perez if the opportunity arose. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, here on Scuderia Ferrari, they have confirmed their new name is basically the same as last year's name, which is pretty mind-blowing, I'm not gonna lie, for Ferrari to do. Usually they change their naming scheme quite often. You know, we had the F-125 back in 2022, we had the SF-24 last year. This year, it's the SF-24. Can you believe it? Ferrari are just doubling down on the same naming scheme. So yeah, Scuderia Ferrari 2024. The first filming day will be on the 14th of February, on of course Valentine's Day, and well, here are the other details. Quite a busy schedule for the Ferrari drivers over the next couple of days. There's also been a tyre test going down over basically today with Pirelli with the SF-23 at, I believe, the circuit Barcelona de Catalunya. So not a track where they did well this season. I think this actually translates to basically like a nightmare circuit, as Giuliano de Kesa puts it. So yeah, 29th and 30th, Pirelli tyre test with the SF-23 at Barcelona Catalunya, which is, as you know, we saw this past season, Verstappen won, but it was the Mercedes that were by far faster than the Ferrari on that weekend. And usually Barcelona is a track where if you're good at Barcelona, you tend to be good elsewhere. Not a circuit we might have on the calendar, though, for too much longer, because Madrid, of course, is coming in the very near future. January the 30th, though, both drivers will be in the SF-23 and the F-175. Another update that I don't think I mentioned recently, but it's now possible for drivers to drive and test the 2022 cars, because there's always like a 2-year delay in terms of when you can do testing with older versions. But of course, the 2022 cars are the ground effect era, so it's actually really quite useful potentially to test those cars. Now, sure, all the teams have the data anyway on those cars during the season, but for young drivers and, you know, likes of Oliver Behrman testing the F-175 or even Arthur Leclerc, can be pretty valuable, because that's the first opportunity those guys really get outside of the FP1 sessions to drive a car in the same era as the current crop of Formula 1 cars. So that's the updates on Ferrari over the coming days. There's also plenty going on at, well, the team formerly known as AlphaTauri. I think this should be formerly rather than formally, but you know, whatever. They've announced quite a few changes here. F1, well, RB F1 team, I guess is what they're going by here. RB F1, I mean, it's so bad, is it? But anyway, there you go. So Tim Goss is coming in, formerly of the FIA, and also Alan Permain is coming in. So this guy was previously Alpine, was surprisingly let go after serving a very long time at that team, at the Enstone team, for like donkey's years really. He's now coming into Visa Cash App RB. So they've made quite a few acquisitions here, and despite the fact that on the surface this team is basically a joke, I mean, in terms of the naming scheme, the fact that it seems to me like a pure marketing exercise. If I worked for the team, I would not see what they've done in terms of the rebrand and feel like they're taking us seriously as an actual contender, when, you know, you're just using all the opportunities available to try and provide value to the sponsors and actually deliberately create no identity by not calling it Racing Bulls and just calling it RB. People might end up calling it Racing Bulls anyway. But regardless of whatever you think about the naming scheme and what that means for the state of the team, and also the relationship they're going to have much closer with Red Bull going forwards, they're still taking it seriously. They believe this team can be competitive. They've hired some big names in order to try and do that, but they're not going to be as competitive as the main Red Bull team, and therefore that raises the question, what's going to happen in the next, 6, 7, 8 months in terms of the driver lineup at Red Bull Racing? So Nate Saunders of ESPN actually mentioned on the Fan Behaviour podcast here about his, beliefs on the upcoming Red Bull situation. There's a few interesting things in here which sounds slightly more like speculation than actual fact, but let's just have a look at what he says. If VCARB, as some people are calling them, are competitive, then RB might just keep Ricciardo there, as in Red Bull might keep Ricciardo at RB F1 team to keep Visa and Cash App happy from a business POV. So we've got to dive into this more in a second, but I'll mention the other bullet points as well. Albon is the big name to look out for the seat, i.e. the main Red Bull seat, right? Because Perez is surely going to go at some point. We don't really know when, but his contract expires at the end of the upcoming season, 2024. He thinks Perez could get a new deal for the next couple of seasons just to avoid the mess of changing drivers, which I'm not sure I buy that personally. I feel like it seems to me there's a very limited chance that Perez's time in this team remains for too much longer. But maybe. It depends really on the competitiveness, right? If Verstappen really can win the championships on his own, drivers and constructors, maybe it doesn't matter if Perez is, not completely torching his own career any more than he already has. But I do find it hard to believe that one. But also, RB don't think that Yuki is cut out to step up to the main team, which is, just a feeling that I think a lot of us have, that despite the fact that Yuki Tsunoda is a very fast driver and was, beat all of his teammates the most recent season, it doesn't feel like Red Bull believe he's the right man to part of Verstappen, so they will look elsewhere. So a couple of big things really here, I guess. This is the main frustrating one for Daniel Ricciardo. He might well be the best suited driver to take Perez's seat and, sit next to Max Verstappen and see what he can do in that car again after, rejecting the opportunity to be in a similar spot several years ago, leaving to go to Renault, potentially now returning to the outfit to still maybe in some respects play second fiddle, but also get some more chances for race victories and stuff like this. But if they were to keep him at the sister team just to keep the sponsors happy, because Ricciardo is such a great PR magnet in many ways, it's kind of tough for Ricciardo, right? It's a blessing and a curse how good his PR is at that point. That, yeah, sure, he gets the seat and everybody loves him, but he gets stuck at RB because that team is purely a marketing exercise now, even though they believe they can be competitive, and therefore Ricciardo might have to stay. And therefore, Alex Albon is back in the conversation. Albon is probably the big name, to be honest, in terms of the driver market as it stands. These are all of the contracts expiring this year. There are some rumours, actually, that Albon's contract runs until 2025, but there is a potential break clause they could go for if Albon wants to leave and go elsewhere from Williams. I'm pretty sure he'll get offers at this point. There's big talks about Ferrari, there's big talks elsewhere. They have mentions before, and Albon actually, I think, implies on the High Performance podcast, whatever it is with Jake Humphries a little while ago now, that he believes if he was to return to Red Bull now, he would do a better job than he did before, and certainly believes he'd do a better job than Perez would. So, Norris has turned down the opportunity, but Norris is at a McLaren team with a bright future and also as effectively the number one at the McLaren team, and that is an advantage you have rather than join Red Bull and be second fiddle to Max. If you can be the number one driver at a very competitive team, it quite possibly makes more sense to do that. But Albon doesn't have that luxury. He's not going to walk into a team as the number one driver, as it were. He might go to Ferrari, but even then, Leclerc is going to be considered the number one. So if there's no options like that and the Red Bull seat is available and they are interested again, now I think Helmut Marko said, well, maybe that ship has sailed. But if Albon's keen, if Red Bull are keen, you can't entirely rule out that possibility, I guess I would say, at the present time. There's also talk as well on, as we have a look at here, the possibility of Yuki Tsunoda or Daniel Ricciardo basically having to call it a day at the end of the season, because it's very unlikely that both of those guys will stay much longer. We know that Liam Lawson has been, if anything, promised a seat in the AlphaTauri, in the RB, whatever. The belief is that that's happening because Ricciardo's going to get brought up to the main team, Perez is going to go somewhere else, maybe another motorsport or to, I don't know, Sauber or something along those lines. And then Tsunoda would potentially stay alongside Lawson. But Peter Windsor says that, quite likely that if Yuki doesn't blow Daniel away, his career might be over. And the other way around, their careers might be over regardless, which is probably good analysis, all things considered. But yeah, the idea that Daniel Ricciardo might be stuck in the sister team because his PR is so good, that's, an interesting one to look at. Just a quick statement before we discuss the Hamilton stuff here from Oscar Piastri, talking about their car. We know that generally speaking, Piastri and Norris are on the more pessimistic end of drivers. They don't tend to, really gas themselves or the team up as much as potentially they could. But generally speaking, McLaren have been talking a big game about their new car. And Piastri says, we're happier than we were at this point 12 months ago with how things are looking. So it's interesting actually to analyse that, because last year their car was terrible at the start of the season, but they knew behind the scenes that they were working on a big upgrade that they thought was going to be very good. So I guess, they were happier 12 months ago. Certainly they must be happier than 12 months ago with the car they presently have compared to the car they presently had back then. But 12 months ago, they also knew that they had a big upgrade they were working on that they were confident in, I guess. So 12 months later, if they're more confident than they were then that's probably a pretty good sign. But as he says, but until you're on track with everybody else, you never quite know what it's going to be like, what the competition is going to be like. The thing is, for us, we have a pretty clear weakness still, the low speed handling compared to our competitors. It's also, we have good strength as well. So that's interesting to note, that he doesn't seem to say, oh no, we've resolved that issue. Seems to kind of imply that the possibility of handling being tricky in the lower speed corners is still potentially going to be there for the new season, and they have some strengths to counteract that. But as we saw last season, the strengths they have are also the strengths that Red Bull have, with less of the downsides, which is where, there's still a pace delta there at the end of the day. How those things are going to balance up against each other, that was a question that Piastri is asking. But yeah, it doesn't sound overwhelmingly positive about the future potential of this team, but nonetheless very interesting. Mercedes, though, they are also in the conversation. Realistically speaking, it should be Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, the teams that at least have some sort of a chance to put the challenge in to Max Verstappen and Red Bull. And Lewis Hamilton might have got a fair bit of a boost here with the return of a pretty crucial figure to his success for many a year. So this guy, Marc Hynes, very competent driver in his own right, as we'll see here in a second, was working with Hamilton for many years, left after 2021 to do other things, and of course Hamilton's had, a difficult stretch in the last 24 months. So Marc Hynes is now back alongside him, and as we see here, there's agreement has been ended with his US-based management company Copper, so that means that the people that were managing him no longer managing him, and therefore he's free to get somebody else in. Now, the article describes how this agreement came to an end of its, basically, the agreement came to an end, as in it ran out, contract expired, so, but Hamilton chose not to renew it effectively, right? So he's obviously made a decision one way or the other, and it wasn't that long ago we saw the surprise confirmation that Angela Cullen was out as his kind of, right-hand woman, I guess, in many respects. Well, his personal trainer, basically, but also she did many other things for him and his team over time. She was gone. It was kind of wondering why, especially when it happened in Jeddah, the most recent season. Now, this is a slightly different circumstance, but it's still worth discussing. So Marc Hynes, who spent 5 years running Hamilton's Project 44 company, but also working on other things within the ecosystem, he moved on in February 2022 and has now returned to assist. Lewis is looking forward to the beginning of the new F1 season, and we're working with Marc Hynes, his long-term friend and former colleague, who will be providing expertise to assist Lewis on the track. So Hynes is also basically a driver coach. We'll see that described here in a second. Marc will be solely focused on racing activities and supporting Lewis's commitment to bringing the fight back to the top spots. That's interesting that, he's no longer going to manage some of the out-of-sport stuff. It's going to be purely on maximizing Hamilton's performance, which is, it's interesting, right? Because we've heard talks about, okay, is Hamilton going to be good enough to theoretically challenge Max Verstappen? Is he committed enough? Is he, obviously is talented enough, but is he still as sharp as he previously was? Is, Max Verstappen is obviously incredible in peak performance. It's going to be tough to come out on top of that, but the feeling is that Hamilton is very much committed to doing so, try and get the 8th title. Mercedes are very much committed to giving Hamilton the car, and they're talking actually quite a big game that they are going to deliver a pretty competitive car. So it seems like Hamilton's trying to construct a team again, which is going to give him the best chance of success. Hynes actually won the Britain's Formula Renault Championship in 1997, 6 years before Hamilton did the same. Both drove for Manor, so they have pretty similar trajectories. Hynes actually won the British Formula 3 title in 99, when Button was then hired despite finishing 3rd ahead of him, and of course, now a world champion in 2009 in his own right. So after Hynes was unable to really secure a spot in the higher formulas, he then worked into driver coaching and has, worked with several talents such as Hamilton for many a year. So his return is, pretty exciting, I guess, for the Hamilton camp, and also in some respects a bit of a right-hand man. But the fact that he's going to be working exclusively on maximizing Hamilton's performance and not worrying about other things maybe makes it clear that Hamilton is, maybe he feels like he needs some help in certain aspects to become again as good as he thinks he needs to be, or he just reckons that Hynes is going to be massively influential in getting him back to the top. There's also this, just real quick, because in the same discussion it was confirmed that Hamilton will be at the factory this week to test the W15 in the simulator. Not sure Hamilton's really been doing this yet. We know that there was talk that he's having regular conversations with the team to ensure that they're basically doing what he says they need to be doing. But I think it was a good few weeks ago now that George Russell was in the factory doing some W15 simulation work. To be fair, at this point, it's more about just observing observing for Russell and Hamilton. They can't say, oh yeah, this is wrong, change this, change that, because it's a little bit too late at this point. Now, there is of course upgrades they can bring, so it will be interesting to hear whether there's any feedback here, because the general perception is, from I think Anthony Davidson said, that the car actually feels like a car now, whereas that's not been the case for quite some time before then. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. There was just this finally as well, that Andretti, it's the general belief that Formula One management will probably reject them for whatever reason they're going to come up with. But Andretti aren't just sitting idly by. They're continuing their preparations, still hiring people they think they need to be hiring. And yeah, there's still no word, despite the fact that the FIA approved them, there's still no word from Formula One management on whether that application is actually going ahead or not. So yeah, hopefully that's resolved in the near future. But very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.